All right. So I am Tom Carpenter. I am an assistant professor of psychology here in the School of Psychology, Family, and Community. I teach in our undergraduate psych program. As Katie mentioned, I am actually an alumni of that program, which is pretty neat. So I actually know some of the alumni in the room, which is kind of neat to see. I teach in our research methods and statistics classes. So, you know, the classes everyone says, that's why I want to get a psych major, right? But we have a lot of fun. We have a lot of fun in those classes. I'm also a social personality psychologist by training, and I do research here at SPU. And my research looks at our hypocritical human nature, right? So on some level, we all have these values, these standards, these core beliefs. Maybe they come from your faith. Maybe they come from your family, your culture. Maybe they're just preferences. You know, I always try to avoid this store. I always want to buy this brand. People have these standards and these goals, and it's probably no surprise to anybody that people are also not very good at following them. We're kind of all self-righteous hypocrites to some degree. And so when I first got started with this research, I said, I want to understand why and how we can prevent this, you know, this kind of pie in the sky, early researcher aspirations. Oh, we're just going to fix this. We'll just solve it, right? And so we did some research on that, and I quickly came to the conclusion that that was kind of a losing battle, that no matter what you do, people are going to lapse. Now, in my faith tradition, this is part of the theology, that this is part of our human nature. And so instead of trying to think about how we could prevent this at a systemic level, I said, well, how do we deal with the fact that we're broken? How do we deal with the fact that we violate our own standards? And so for me, I do a lot of research on guilt. So just show of hands, how many people would say they like guilt? None. Okay, well, maybe one. Okay, but not a lot of guilt fans in the audience. That's fine. I'm hoping I will be able to change this by the end of this talk. So that's my magic trick. We'll see if we can change that by the end. So being a social scientist, first I just wanted to say, well, what does our society think about guilt? So to do this as scientifically as possible, I looked at book titles on Amazon. So we'll just look at a couple up there. Our clicker is dead. So here's one I found. A lot like this. Guilt-free. There's something up here. You'll notice up here it's subtitled, Guilt is the adversary's tool. It's this debilitating force that slows us down. There are a number like this. Guilt is this cage that we need to be trapped from. If only we could live a guilt-free life, maybe we would be happy, described as our inner critic. Not very positive views of guilt. In fact, if you look at titles, you see things like getting rid of guilt and living the life that you want, being guilt-free and green. Guilt is somehow these shackles that are tying us in bondage. And if you look across titles, and there are a number of them, you notice kind of two themes. The first is that we're not very happy with how we live our lives, right? We don't eat well, our kids watch too much TV, we spent too much money on Candy Crush. People are not particularly happy with how they live their lives, and they have some kind of chronic guilt about this. The other theme that you tend to see is that people feel like they would be happy if only they could get rid of their guilt. If only I could just make this guilt go away, I would be free. In other words, guilt is this prison, and if I could just abolish it, I would be happy. I want to make the claim to you today that this is the last thing you want to do if you want to be happy. Incidentally, this is not a new view of guilt. If you go all the way back to old Siggy, Sigmund Freud right up here, guilt is described as neurosis, right? Part of these lessons that we've internalized from this society that are making us unwell. So this is not a new idea in psychology. But I want to suggest to you, you all know to some degree that this is not the whole story. Because imagine you're sitting here in the vantage point from which this photo is taken, right? You're sitting in a courtroom, there's a judge up there, somebody's on trial, they've done something wrong. Maybe they were driving under the influence or stole something from a store. And when the judge goes to sentence this person, what emotion do you want to hear from the person who broke the law? You want to hear that they feel guilty, right? We want people who do bad to feel bad. If they don't, we think they're psychopaths. I don't know about you, I don't want to live in a world of psychopaths, and I don't want to be one myself. We want people who do bad to feel bad. In fact, we think of feeling bad when you do bad as kind of a core part of our moral fiber, right? That's a core part of our humanity. So which is it? Is it a prison from which we need to all be set free, or is it something really important for our humanity? Well, since I'm a scientist, we should review a few scientific findings. In psychology, we've been studying guilt proneness as a personality or temperamental trait for a long time. And I'll just give you a smattering of findings we see. People who tend to feel guilty easily, we see all sorts of positive outcomes for these people. They tend to apologize more. No surprise there, right? But we see some other ones too. They tend to have better self-control. They tend to change their bad behaviors more easily. They tend to approach their wrongdoings, right? If I feel guilty, I'm going to come up to you and do something about it. And that's important. Because if I don't feel guilty, I might not have that drive to do that. They tend to feel more empathy for others. Someone who feels guilty easily cares if they hurt you. Not just because they feel guilty, they feel bad about how you feel. They tend to solve disputes cooperatively. And one of my favorite ones, actually, Martinez et al., they actually followed people after they were released from jail or prison. And they followed them over time, and they found that people who have this dispositional guilt temperament reoffended less. Right? We spend how much money trying to prevent people from relapsing on their probation or committing crimes again, and yet something about this guilt temperament is predicting the likelihood to not reoffend. So there's something valuable about guilt. Maybe there's something good about guilt. I just showed a picture of a weight room. Maybe this is causing guilt for some of us, actually. In psychology, we need to be clear what we mean by guilt. I think that's very important. In psychology, we tend to think of guilt as a behavior focus. So I've done something bad, and I feel bad about the thing that I did. I run a red light, and I think, ooh, I really shouldn't have done that. That was not a good thing to do. That's what we typically mean by guilt. And that's what you want to see from those people who are, say, getting sentenced in court. On the other hand, we define shame, which a lot of us use these words interchangeably, but in the psych literature, we define shame as I feel bad about myself in this offense context. And so it's a subtle difference, but it can actually make a big difference. So guilt is I feel bad about the thing. Shame is I feel bad about me. Now, when I teach our personality class, I have my undergrads do an exercise. I'm going to try to do it here. It's probably not going to work very well, but that's fine. This half of the room, I'm going to assign you to be guilt people. Okay? So I'm going to have you imagine a scenario. This half of the room, you guys are going to be shame people. We're going to do the same exercise. It will just be tweaked a little bit. So guilt people, I want you to imagine that you had a New Year's resolution to go into this gym, and like most people, you didn't do it very well. And so you're going in there maybe in March, and you've got a trainer who's assigned to you, and they give you the following feedback. They say, I am really disappointed in the effort that you put in. I'm very disappointed in the effort that you put in. Okay. I want you to think about not just how you'd feel, but what that might drive you to do, how you would react to that. Think about that for a minute. This half of the room, we're going to do the same thing, but I want you to imagine you get the following feedback. I'm very disappointed in you in this gym. I'm disappointed in you. I don't think you have what it takes. Okay? Guilt people, you got some behavior feedback. If you're like most people, your response to that is to feel maybe a little guilty, but also most people tend to feel challenged. Wow, I need to do better, right? Because a behavior is changeable. I can fix a bad behavior. I can drive better. I mean, I might have some struggles along the way, but there's nothing blocking me from that ultimately, right? But if the problem is myself, there's not a lot I can do about that. That's kind of permanent. And so with shame, people who tend to feel shame, they don't have the same approach and repair response. They avoid, they withdraw. And there are some adaptive qualities to that, right? You don't want to just wave around for all the world to see your core flaws as a person. Go back to ancient days, you get kicked out of the tribe, you wouldn't survive. Okay, so there's some adaptive qualities to this, but maybe guilt isn't the prison that we want it to be. Now, I'm going to make the case to you that both guilt and shame have some adaptive qualities. So what is it that this prison that we all think we want to escape from, I want to make the case to you, it's not living a life free of guilt or maybe even shame. I want to make the case to you that we need to learn to forgive ourselves. And that this is not the same as living without guilt. In my area of research, we talk about self-forgiveness as a process, right? I have to feel guilt first. I have to feel bad about what I've done. And then I go on this journey to recover from that. And hopefully in that journey, there's some learning, there's some change, there's some growth. But that abolishing guilt would actually just keep us from ever going on this journey. And that would not be good. So I'll tell you a little bit about a study that my lab has done recently. We wanted to explore the roles of shame and guilt in self-forgiveness. And so what we did was we gave a survey. It was a rather large survey. It had about 400 people who participated in it, collected through some online communities that we recruit from, well, one in particular. And so we measured how self-forgiving they were in their core dispositions. And this is no surprise to us, and hopefully it's not to you, that people who tend to feel shame, they had a harder time with this. They self-forgave less in general. That's not a surprise to anybody. What might be a surprise to you is that, and this is true whether or not you look at shame, people who feel guilt self-forgive more. There is a positive correlation. The guilt-prone people, the higher they score on that dimension, the more they self-forgive. Now, the first time I saw this, and I've run into this a few times over the years, I thought this is a fluke, right? This can't be. Guilt can't help us forgive ourselves, right? But it came up again and again, and so finally my lab here at SPU said, we need to figure this out. Our hypothesis, which we found in our data, was that this shouldn't be anything about the emotional response of guilt that's particularly helpful. We might think, well, you know, in fact, if I'm feeling guilty, that's a sign to me that I do need to forgive myself. So it's not the emotion that we wouldn't think would be helpful directly. Instead, what we predicted and what we found, thankfully, was that people who tend to feel guilt, what do? They apologize more. And that's helpful for self-forgiveness. I apologize, I make amends, that helps me move on. They also, independently of that, tended to change their behavior more. Their response to their wrongdoings is to do something different, which independently from apology also predicted an increased self-forgiving response. And this one I really appreciate, they tend to avoid less. They don't hide away from what they've done. They stand and face it. And that, of course, is not particularly helpful, so getting rid of that is good for self-forgiveness too. So this is a good story about guilt. This is a positive story. I like to think of guilt as just Aquafresh, right? We offer some triple protection. I don't want to live a guilt-free life at all. I would be maybe happy living a shame-free life, but I don't want to live a guilt-free life. I do want to live a life in which I can forgive myself. And the story that we're seeing, and actually since we've published this, we've seen some other labs produce some similar findings in some other ways. And I didn't show you all of our data. We had several different ways of measuring guilt, and they all told the same story, which is nice. But that guilt is maybe an asset to us. And I'll close with this. You know, doing this research for me at SPU is really cool because we're encouraged to think about how this fits with our whole self, not just approaching this as a data cruncher, but as a person. The more I spend time with this, the more I feel permission to feel guilt and not shame. And for me, that actually comes from my faith as a person. If I believe that I've been forgiven, made whole, maybe myself is okay. Maybe if I do something wrong, that doesn't mean I'm fundamentally broken beyond repair. Maybe that gives me some permission to approach what I've done and deal with it. So, you didn't think a talk about guilt was going to be uplifting? Hopefully it is. Thank you so much.